Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefuehl. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Porsche Carrera 911S. We already know that we like the coupe edition, but how do we find it with a soft top? Let's take a closer look and find out. This is now our third clip about the new 911, so we're not going to go into amazing detail on the exterior or design. Check out the links below if you want to see what Thomas did with the 911 on the racetrack for a lot more technical specification. Take a look at that clip. If you're interested in listening to the experts tell us a lot more about the design that went into it, look to the clip that Jonas and I made in Hockenheim. Today, our focus is entirely on the Cabriolet. Now, clearly, that is a fantastic experience for Jonas and I. We already both very much know and like this car. The question with cabriolets is always, how much are you compromising in design terms and performance terms to get that soft top? So we're going to be having a look and seeing, does it still make the aesthetic work? Does it have too much of an impact on performance? And is it a pleasurable experience to use? But before we get into all of that, let's talk about this design just a little bit. Well, a lot has changed from the predecessor. This is really a very different car. Now, some people might laugh at me straight away where they're saying if you park two next to each other, they're not radically different. Don't forget, it is a 911, so it could only be a good thing that things haven't radically departed. But there are lots of changes that do add up to an awful lot of difference. Not least, the car is now 4.5 centimeters wider in both the front and back. That's about that much. And it really does add to the visual presence of the car. It looks more aggressive than the predecessor, and a lot of the styling changes have added to that. Look at this angularity that we now have that wasn't there. I think things were a lot rounder before. A lot of crispness has come back into this design, a lot more horizontal design elements, and overall a lot more aggressive in terms of the styling. I think in combination with these brand new lights, it really looks fantastic, but I might be a bit biased. What do you think about the new design? Cards on the table, I've always been a very big fan of the 911, but there definitely were a few points that could have used some tweaking, and with this they really have nailed it. Now, chief amongst those, and I think one of the best additions to the new model, is the wheels. If you have a look, you can see that the rear is slightly larger than the front. This is a 21-inch wheel at the front, we have a 20, and the dynamic feel that adds to the design is huge. Now there's lots of different colors and shapes to go for, so if black enamel isn't your thing, there are some much more traditional 911 designs with some really nice Spider new ones. More about that in Thomas's review if you want to check it out. I'm concerned about what this does to the appearance. Well, in the modern era, soft top roofs are so well designed and thought through. From the outside, it's actually very unusual to see cars that have had their lines ruined by the addition of them, and this is no exception. Obviously, there's needed to be a significant amount of strengthening of the A-pillar, as it does perform such an important safety feature within a soft top design, but in no way do you feel any additional presence there. The roof looks every bit as svelte and sophisticated as you would want it to. It shouldn't dominate any part of your visual experience. It should just be there without spoiling the line of the car. Come on, really, I think this is a pretty great job. As you take all of this car in, there is nothing about that car that says anything other than get in and drive me. Round at the back, the first things you notice are the changes from the predecessor 911. This lighting strip that cuts straight across the rear, the slight, subtle but still significant change in font that they've used, and of course the lower section here has really been somewhat reimagined but in a very gentle, sophisticated way. So there's nothing here to upset the purists, while newcomers, I think, are going to find something to like. Coming higher up the design, look at these two lights right here. They really do add a characteristic that wasn't there before. And it does something which I don't necessarily does work quite so well for the Cabriolet, which is this. Because we have a soft top roof, it really does break up the visual presence of the rear. So while on the standard model, you don't get a sense of the massiveness of the back, you do just get a little bit of the additional height and depth of the width here in the rear. But you're always going to be making slight compromises for a Cabriolet, and there's not enough visually here to disrupt at all. The emphasis is still on the styling, as it should be in the bottom third, and it all ties together really nicely. Now, the most defining characteristic of a soft top's aesthetic is, of course, how it looks when the roof's off, and that's why we've kept Jonas a little bit further back while I've stepped into the inside. Well, there's nothing but good news here. I can tell you that in order to fully drop that roof or put it back in place takes now only 12 seconds. And that is 2 seconds faster than the predecessor. And if that doesn't sound like a big deal, when you're driving and you want to put the lid up or down, and you can do that up to 50 kilometers per hour, it is amazing what those 2 seconds feel like. It is so much faster, so much easier to use, and just absolutely effortless. So let's have another quick look at the exterior now that we've got that roof down. Well, as I already said, this beefed up support here really doesn't touch the aesthetic. It's all very clean. If you standardly put the roof into the down position, you will still have these windows in their upright position. Clearly that's to assist with road noise. What I can tell you from our initial driving impressions is that unless your road surfaces are amazing, as with all cabriolets, you are going to be experiencing quite a bit of that. So unless the weather's a little colder, aesthetically, it's best with the windows down, and I think it's the best experience you can have. The clever design of these rear quarter lights is actually activated separately, so you can choose to have these up, the roof up, these down, these up, any combination that you like. Really, it's about what your comfort level is and also how good you want to look. So for my money, if you want the most comfortable ride, it's still with these up. If you have to have a conversation, it's much better. But honestly, for aesthetic, and that's really why you want the Cabriolet, get them down. Really feel the wind in your hair and just enjoy it. One of the things I love so much about Cabriolet from the point of view of filming with them is that you can show things you just can't show on a coupe. So let's take a closer look at the rear of this car in terms of how it reacts to its coupe brother. Well, if you've seen Thomas's clip, you will be aware that nothing has changed here at all, except that we are missing, there was a parcel shelf approximately the same diameter as this, around about here in the coupe, so you had extra storage back there. That is all now taken up with roof, but it hasn't made any kind of an impact on the amount of space that there is available to you as a rear seat passenger. Now this is particularly nice because we can show you quite how absurdly short my legs are, just for reference. This driver's seat is set for me. This passenger seat is set for Jonas. That gives you a really decent chance to see realistically what the back of this car is like. So it's going to be quite a challenge for anyone of any dimension to fit back there. But if you're traveling as my passenger, I think you should just about be able to squeeze in. Certainly with the roof down, life is a lot more comfortable. Well, there you go, seats fully back. It's not comfortable, but it just about works. And for the opportunity to be able to go around and enjoy a soft top, I think I could just about live with it. When I do drop both of the windows, you can immediately see what I mean about the rear, because instead of being visually drawn to this area of the side, you are immediately drawn to back here. Well, we've got these larger wheels back here and we have an awful lot of engine. So having the focal point be this, I don't know is such a bad thing after all. Well, this is the point at which we usually show you the engine, and in a Porsche 911, that's always going to be something of a disappointment. Clearly not because there's anything wrong with the engine, but because you can't see a whole lot of it. What I can tell you is that the newly revised engine is producing 450 horsepower and 530 Newton meters of torque. In both instances, that's 30 more than its predecessor. How have they achieved that? Well, there's been a huge amount of component move around going on in there. Lots of the systems have changed the way in which they work to become more efficient, and of course there are always weight savings. If you want to know more on the technical detail, have a look below in the comments. Jonas and I did a really great piece from Hockenheim where we spoke to people a lot cleverer than us about exactly how they've achieved it. It's often the little details on cars that make me smile. And as we come down here, we can see the big black dome that contains a sensor array for the front. I can't look at that without thinking of Howl in 2001, and it just makes me smile. Now, while we're here at the front, it's a great opportunity to talk about the available storage on this car. Regular viewers might remember Jonas and I taking a look at the 718 last year, and I really enjoy that because you have two storage areas. The mid-mounted engine means you have some in the back, some in the front. Obviously, on the 911, there's an awful lot of engine back there, so we're just limited to storage in the front. So what does that effectively mean or look like? That is 135 litres of load space, which is actually really pretty good for a car of this size. You can adequately fit plenty of things in there for a nice weekend break or more than enough shopping. So come on, it's a sports car. I don't think you can reasonably want more than that. And it's really nicely delivered. Thank you very much for putting the option to do that on the key rather than necessarily needing to get in the car. It makes life very simple, so really easy to use, very straightforward, and really in keeping with the design of the car. One of the most famous signatures of the 911 is of course the spoiler at the back. Now in modern 911s, that's been electronic as opposed to a permanent presence. In this car, under normal circumstances, you should expect to see the first stage come up at around about 90 kilometers per hour and the full extension at 150. Now, in previous days, there'd have been a button conveniently placed for me to activate that, but in this car, we use the infotainment system by selecting car and then holding your finger on the spoiler button for it to extend. And Jonas should be able to go around the back and show you not only how that looks when it's up, but also how it looks when it's down. So once you know what you're looking for in the menu system, it's actually really quite straightforward to activate. But the car knows what it's doing, and I'm quite inclined to leave it well alone and let the car get on with making its own decisions about when it wants to utilize that as a resource. We're going to take a look around the interior now, and we're going to do that with the roof down to give us the opportunity to show you an extra perspective. But don't worry, we're also going to show you a lot more with the roof up later on when we're driving. But for now, this is the entry key, so will look very familiar to regular fans of Porsche. And as we have mentioned on more than one occasion, we have a new handle design. Well, it looks fantastic and it is responsive, but its use, well, there you can see what it looks like when it's sitting slightly proud. And after around about 30 seconds, it will disappear straight back into the housing. Now, as I said, it looks fantastic. As for how it feels when you actually touch it, a little bit on the plasticky side. So Thomas and I have both said before and agree, aesthetics, yes. Finishing could be slightly better. As we open up the door and take a look at our first glance for the interior, we can see that style and sophistication really are the two key words here. Everything is very conservative, very nicely finished. Look at the detail on this strip right here. Very subtle, really in keeping with the style. And as you sweep the camera across and you show what greets you as you look first of all at the interior, what you can see is that everything here has been slightly downplayed to really give you a sense of sportiness, style, modernity, and driving focus. What I do like in particular though, is that there are lots of nice visual details to treat you and reward you the more time you spend with this car. At first, you don't so obviously notice or interact with them, but they're all there and they're all really rewarding to come across. Look at this finished detail right here. It's really indicative of the way that the car has been put together in a way that just offers you lots of things to feel happy about the more you use it. This is particularly nice here. This is a detail on the steering wheel, and as you can see, as Jonas puts the camera on that, my hand behind it, these selections are actually floating. So at first they look as if they're built into the steering wheel, but once you get a closer look at them, you can see how much design has gone into that. So just because it looks fairly simple on the surface, there are huge amounts of details here to discover the more time you spend with the car. And I think that's exactly what you would want from a 911. The 911 can come with fully leather seats, but it's very pleasing to me to note there are now lots more alternatives. And I think we really start to get a sense that the manufacturers are being a lot more responsive to individual choices when it comes to interior layout. Are the seats actually going to prove to be comfortable to sit in though? Let's take a look. Getting in and out of sports cars has always been something of a challenge for, shall we say, the generously proportioned gentleman. But it's now a fairly standard thing on these sports cars that when you turn the ignition off, the seat comes back, the steering wheel goes forward, and they're much easier to get in and out of than they used to be. So unless you have any particular challenges, it's really a breeze getting in and out of, especially if you have a soft top. Now the seat itself, when you first sit in it, you think, gosh, that's actually a little bit stiff. Is that going to be comfortable? But what I can tell you is that every bit as much thought and design has gone into this seat as the rest of the car. So what at first may feel a little rigid really is so supportive once you start driving, and very comfortable. We've put quite a few miles on this car today, and we've both commented on how very much we've enjoyed the ride experience. So aesthetically, they sit very nicely within the design. The comfort level is great. And if you're used to larger, more plush, plumper seats, yeah, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment. But once you start driving this, I really don't think you're going to be paying attention to that at all, as long as you feel good when you leave the car. And it's been our experience that you absolutely will. So, full range of adjustment here, an awful lot of different things that we can change with the seat to make it just right for us. How's the driving position? Really very happy with that. You're low but not too low. You're wrapped by the car but not overwhelmed by the car. You have a really nice road sitting position, and of course it's a 911, so it's just begging you to drive it. Everything about the experience of sitting here is all focused on saying one thing to me, and that's let's go. Well, the sun's come out again now, and we're not quite finished with the interior, which seems like an excellent opportunity to show you how putting the roof up looks from the inside of the car. Well, again, this is just a 12-second operation, so it really is absurdly simple, effortless, and very functional. As you can see, all of the windows come up to match the roof. With the roof in fully closed position, obviously all of the windows come up. Jonas is going to want better access in order to be able to show more of the interior. But I did particularly want to show you those rear quarter light windows because the folding action, I think, is particularly nice on them. Now, I select that from the options and down it goes. So there's a little bit of fiddle to doing that. There's actually a separate button underneath the window ones that you have to activate. You know when it's been activated because it comes on as a light. Well, I'm not sure how much that necessarily helps you when you're driving. And then the standard window controls become the controls for the quarter lights. Well, that sounds all a bit faffy, but don't forget, if you own one of these, you will get used to that adjustment really very quickly. We have memory seats in this car, and that's a really good thing because, and I'm still not quite sure I understand why this has become a thing, but if you want to move the seats to gain better access to the front, well, you're going to want to make some time available to do it. It's not a quick operation. I'm sure there are reasons why you couldn't have a mix between the electric and the manual, but I always think for sliding backwards and forwards, just give me a handlebar to grab. Well, we switched seats so that Jonas could show you in a lot more detail what's happening digitally to this car. We're going to talk about this more during the driving scenes, but it's a lot easier to be able to show you some of these details while we are stationary. So, positives first. It is not easy bringing a fully digital display into a driving aesthetic like a 911, and I'm very happy with the job that Porsche have done here. There's loads of ability to change the displays to whatever it is that you want to be seeing, so you don't have to be stuck with only what it is that Porsche want you to look at. Now, that's the positive. The not so positive is, as you can tell, if Jonas comes slightly further back, the steering wheel blocks off at least a third of the display. Now, in my experience, that wasn't particularly a problem because you can always move your head if you really find you need to know what any of these details are. I'm not sure if Jonas can show you those without moving. Really, the most important information is fully visually available to you. And I am a huge fan of what Porsche have done here. Having this speed limit indicator right here is so visually present when you're driving. That, in conjunction with the rev counter that you so clearly want and your speed readout, really makes keeping your driving license intact in this car much easier than it otherwise would be. Now, that might seem like a small detail, but we drive an awful lot of cars here at Autogefuehl, and it always shocks me the amount of cars that don't give that display prominence, because it really is the information you need, especially when you're traveling in an area you're not familiar with. So, all of this right here, it looks great, it behaves great, it gives you the information you need. Some of it's concealed by the steering wheel, but I can't see how they could have done it any differently and still kept the aesthetic and the detail as much as they have. So, I'm a fan of that. It works. I'm prepared to live with the compromise. Moving on. This is the infotainment system display. So, visually it's great. The quality is nice. Obviously, as you would expect, the processor is fast and responsive. So, actual interaction with this is fine, as long as you're not driving. What do I mean by that? Well, take a look at this button. As you can see in the bottom left corner, that's what we're going to want to push to bring up our options. Now, how on earth are you supposed to distinguish between that if I go back home and hitting this, which is the climate control, when you're driving? That is, I don't know if you could own this car for 3 years and still ever figure out intuitively how to do that without touching it. Look at the adjustments for the climate control. That is hardly simple and straightforward. It absolutely is not what I would pick if I had my choice. And unfortunately, that was my experience of using the entire system. Now, this car comes with the standard Bose system. It's actually a very good stereo system for the coupe. Why do I say that? Well, when the roof comes off, the sound profile obviously completely changes. It's not a big deal, but in order to make the most of it, you need an awful lot more bass with the roof down than you do when it's up. Why is that a big deal? Why should you care? You shouldn't really. It's only this. I'm driving along, I think, oh, it'd be great to have my roof down. It's turned out to be a lot nicer than I thought. And I'm listening to my favorite tunes. Now in a traditional setup, if I think, oh, I need more bass, that should be a couple of twists, a very simple adjustment. Take a look at this. I need to go right through the menu system. In fact, I don't, there we are, even know that I can do it even stationary. Jonas did this earlier for me, and it is astonishing. There we are, sound settings, fader, balance, tone. There we go, and let's increase the bass. There we go. Now, I find that a bit of a faff while I'm sitting in a car stationary in the passenger position. There is no way in the world that I would be able to do that while I'm driving. It's not the most important thing in the world, but it is bothersome. You really want to make the most of this car, and whereas the controls in the predecessor were really simple and straightforward to access, they just aren't here. Now, another good example is this. In order to bring about the greatest efficiency that's achievable with this car, as with all other Porsches, the automatic stop-start function is always on by default. Now, in the predecessor, we had some really nicely laid out controls here. It was simply a matter of doing that. Now you can say, well, this isn't a big deal, but you have to go home and then you have to go start, stop, start, stop. Now, that's not a huge deal, is it? But you still have to pay close attention to the screen in order to do it. It certainly isn't a question of just running your thumb to the button where you know it is and hitting it. There has been a concession to try and make some of these things a bit more responsive. If we look slightly further down to the knurling on these keys, you can see that we have programmable buttons. As to how much you can program them and what you can program them to do, I strongly suspect it's a little more limited than you might like. And after all, we only have 2 of them, so clearly you're going to want to reserve that for driving characteristics that you know and like. It's a nod to me in the direction of BMW in terms of making the user experience feel a little bit more intuitive. But as for this, there's an awful lot more work to be done. It's very comprehensive. I really enjoy the huge extent to which we can adjust all of the things that we're looking at. That was great fun for Jonas while we were driving, but practically speaking, as a driver, I just don't know how much opportunity you're going to have to engage with that. Again, think of the exhaust note. That's something you commonly want to change. On the predecessor, it was a button and it was located right next to the start-stop, an easy adjustment. In this car, again, we need to select this button. That's pretty close to these while I'm driving. Then I need to push this button to change the exhaust profile. Now, as a stationary user, this is visually very pleasing to do. I like it. The software is great, the speed and responsiveness is good, the visual interface is excellent. But this is a car, it's for driving, not for me to be looking at this area while I'm doing it. So, I'm sorry Porsche, I want to love this, but that's a big thumbs down from me. Coming slightly further down, we have Thomas's favorite feature. This is what he always describes as looking just like an electric shaving device. Well, I don't mind it at all, and it actually feels really nice and solid in the hand and good. So when you are stopping and you want to do a 3-point turn in your car, it's very satisfying to nudge this up and backwards and just get what you need. It feels solid and it should do. So I enjoy that, and I like the materials matching in terms of the knurling here and the knurling here. Those feel nice and aggressive and they're well put together. The same applies to the dials here. Now, once again, I would have liked to have seen a little more detailing when it comes to these controls down here. I always really like car design where you can find the differentiation between buttons easily and instinctively from memory, by touch and not by looking. There hasn't been a huge amount of attempt made to differentiate anything. I suspect as we move along and we progress, a lot of these functions are things that you'll be doing with voice command rather than using the buttons. I must admit, I was just a really big fan of the layout of the display and the utility of the choices down here on the previous version, and I'm just not very convinced about all of this new stuff. However, don't panic. They haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater. If you are a big fan of the Chrono Pack, and honestly, I can't see why you would buy a 911 without spending the extra, we still have this really rather nice looking clock embedded in the dashboard. And of course, the most fun bit of all, the drive mode selector right here. It's solid, it's instinctive, and it works really nicely. If Jonas moves the camera slightly higher up, we can see how satisfying that is. And as you roll through your selections, you just don't even need to think about it. Now, on that note, let's talk about this selection right here. This is a new wet mode. What that does is it massively enhances the way that the car handles and behaves in the wet. So it has sensors built right into the car. When it notices that conditions are starting to change for wet conditions, it will already start making changes in anticipation that that's what you're going to want to do. And it will sound you a warning note allowing you to select it. But by default, it's always off. Reason being, Porsche want you to have a driving experience that you want to have. So it's always your decision as to how much of what of those assistance systems you want at any given time. about taking our drive. It's just the early start of sunset and it's beautiful here. What I really wanted to show you is how practical and easy it is to open this roof while you're driving. There we go. I'm currently going 30. This function works all the way up to 50 kilometers per hour. That's really nice. Why do I think that's so great? Well, think about it. Where are you most likely to be wanting to do that? My guess is when you're driving around town. You're not going to be going fast, but you can go up to 50, and then all of a sudden you're in a topless car. Now that's pretty nice. So, speaking of driving around town, we're obviously in a very built up area here for Greece countryside, which means we really can't make the most of the sports feature of the car. But we can see how politely it behaves when you're just taking a nice slow cruise round. You don't have to have the loud noise of the sports exhaust. You don't have to have that throbbing power waiting to explode on you. You really can just poot around town in this car. Why do I care about pootering? You might be saying, it's a 911. I really want to see how it drives. I'm sure you do, but you are going to be spending a lot more time driving a car like this in environments that are a bit more built up and won't allow you the freedom. But what defines a 911 as a Porsche is the way it behaves when you tell it that you'd like to see a little bit more. Well, to give you that experience, we're going to start from standing and just see exactly what Sports Plus can deliver. Now, before we get to a point at which we can actively do that, I have to tell you that we have our Chrono Pack fitted on this car, which means we have various different driving modes. Chrono Pack means you also get the Sports Plus. That makes the car a little bit looser, a little bit more ragged to drive, a lot more aggressive. So if you find that some of those controlling systems are just a little bit too inflexible for you and you really want to experience the power and the thrill of it, that's exactly what that's for. Once you start finding out what the car can deliver with the top off, it's very hard going back to having a roof. Okay, so we've left town now, which means we can start enjoying driving a little bit more. We've put it in Sports Plus and immediately you can hear the change in note. But that's not really all that we're looking for. Ooh. Feel that. And immediately we've gone straight from an average round town pottering machine to a raw beast. The handling is fabulous on this car. The 8-speed dual clutch is really superb. Yes, you get quick change paddles, so you can have all kinds of fun playing with the gearbox, but the automatic gearbox does such a wonderful job of giving you the power exactly when you need it. You really don't need to use them. Well, talking of handling, a lot of the changes that have been made on the new 911 make it feel much more responsive and aggressive, but still polite enough around the corners. Now, we mentioned earlier on there's a wet mode. We just drove through some water. Jonas was telling me earlier that the way that these sensors work is through noise. It detects what's happening to water on the road through noise and then makes the adjustments necessary to deliver the benefit of the wet mode to you while you're driving. Well, fortunately, there's not too much water on the roads around here, just an awful lot of fun. So, we're back into a town situation. Don't want to shock the residents. Straight back into normal mode. We're back to cruising again. It's really nice and quiet. Nobody's getting upset and we're very comfortable driving around. But don't worry, towns around here don't last for too long. When they're gone, well, we can put it back in sports again. There's always going to be a price to pay for driving a Cabriolet, and in the case of this car, that means an extra 70 kilograms of weight. And that isn't insignificant, but it only takes 0.2 of a second off the acceleration speed from the coupe, so I really don't think that's going to be causing you to lose too much sleep. Now, every time there's a new model of any car, they pretty much tell you that it's lighter and faster. Well, that's not the case for the new 911. This car is actually 50 kilograms heavier than its predecessor. And the reason for that is that although they've made a lot of the components and the structure lighter, they've also added a lot of new technology to it, and they have also added new particle filters on the exhaust system. So that all adds up to a little bit more heft. But don't worry, according to Porsche, the steering is 10% more responsive. And oh my word, you really can feel that. Talking of acceleration, the new car is absolutely fabulous. You can get 3.9 seconds for 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in the standard model, but if you want the Chrono Pack and the Sports Package Extra, then you're going to bump that to 3.7. That's an improvement of nearly half a second over its predecessor. I have to tell you, I'm more than happy with that. Now, while we're on the subject of acceleration and responsive steering, I can tell you that another new addition is rear steering in the back. That gives you an additional 2 degrees of potential steering on the car, which makes a huge difference to its ability to handle. While we're talking about handling, it's probably a good time to mention your different drive options. Well, not going to come as a big surprise to you to learn, you can either get this car as an all-wheel drive or as a rear-wheel drive. Well, I don't really know that I can drive a modern car and claim to be a purist, but what I can tell you is that because of the weight of the engine in the back and all of these advances in terms of handling, you really don't need that all-wheel drive. Yeah, if you want to experience the absolute maximum in control, then maybe it's not a bad touch, but I have to tell you, you will be blown away by quite how well the rear-wheel drive delivers. That weight of the engine and the way that everything has been set up means you are never feeling as if you're missing any control whatsoever. So, put it all together and what do you get? Well, there's really only one way to demonstrate that, I think. Earlier on when we were doing some filming, Jonas was watching obviously as we were driving backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, as he always does. And I said to him, Jonas, you absolutely have to experience this. And even though he'd been sitting there filming the car doing exactly the thing that we were about to do, he still couldn't keep the grin off his face and believe quite how much fun it was. So now I'm going to do exactly the same thing and take you with us. Again, we're in standard mode. Everything is completely comfortable, nobody's being distressed. The road noise, which I'm sure you can pick up on the mic, is actually very good, and we have taken this on some slightly faster roads. It maintains its nice characteristic throughout. But as soon as you're around a couple of those bends and you want to find out what happens when you want to up-rate your driving a little bit, well, this is what 3.7 feels like. Woo! That's fabulous. Now, if you've driven powerful rear-wheel cars before, you will be more than aware of the potential danger of just flat-footing it. But everything in this car has been so nicely set up, you never feel that you're quite in danger of losing control, but just close enough to it to have so much fun while you're driving, you just won't stop smiling. Now, as far as the rest of the driving experience is concerned, I'm somewhat sorry to say we're moving back into territory where I can't drive quite the way that I'd like to. I think it's worth mentioning again at this point, the main thinking behind this clip is to show you what the Cabriolet can deliver. If you really want to see how this car can perform at speed, please have a look below and we will link to Thomas's edition taking it out on the track. But this is much more real-world everyday usage. With the sun coming down, you really can get a sense of everything that a Cabriolet can deliver. The driving experience is really absolutely delightful. The things that make the huge difference to a driver, all the assistance systems are so refined, so good. The engine is fabulous. That additional speed from the predecessor hasn't been wasted a drop of, and everything works great. I have to tell you that the gears are superb. Well, that's everything that's good. What's not good is the infotainment system. I'm not going to bore you with that. We can go into those details later. At the end of the day, I have all the information I need laid out in front of me. I could care less about this. I'm having far too much fun to worry. If you're going to go ahead and order one of these, there are two things that I absolutely think are must-haves. The first is the Chrono Pack. There's no world in which I own one of these and I'm not going to want that clock and everything that pertains to it. Okay, it's not really about the clock, but I think you understand what I'm saying. The other is the optional Burmester sound system. It's going to cost you an extra $4,000 on list price, but my goodness, you're really going to get something for that money. Don't forget, there's nothing wrong with the base model of stereo on this unit, but it's designed for use more in a coupe than it is for a soft top. So when you're driving around with the roof on, it's great, but the minute you take it off, you just feel a little sad. You will not do that with a Burmester. Please check it out and tell me what you think. Well, it's coming towards the end of the day. The sun's going down. It's been absolutely stunning driving around in our soft top car. We're in town for argument's sake. There's a bit of traffic and suddenly we don't feel like we want to be outside in the open anymore. So we learnt this the hard way. First thing that has to happen is we need to take this camera off and give it to Jonas. Then with one press of the button, up comes the roof. So currently going 43, and there we go. Look at that. So I think this is a useful experiment to do because you should be able to pick up on just how much of a reduction in wind noise you get. Interestingly, but probably not surprisingly, the most wind noise you can experience in this car is if you have the roof up and the windows down. Clearly that makes the roof almost behave in the same way that a sail does, so you get an awful lot of noise in the car. It really is roof up or roof down for most of the time, unless you're just cruising around town. But the design of the aerodynamics on the car with the roof down are so effective now, you can still carry out a good conversation with the roof down at even significant speeds. Now, there is one other significant factor about having a soft top, and that of course is going to be the effect on your car's aerodynamics. So we reset our fuel efficiency at the start of the day to see what we could end up with. I would say that the vast majority of our driving has been like this, so very gentle. We've only done around about an hour of really letting it rip and seeing what the car can do. So because of that, I think the figure that we've ended up with is a very fair representation for this car. Porsche may not agree, but I'm reporting a fuel figure of 14.3 litres for every 100 kilometers driven. Now, whilst that does not make this the most efficient car that you've ever driven, it's also well worth noting that when we were looking at the engine breakdown, we noticed that there was actually a space within the engine design, and that has been left there to accommodate an electric motor being added to make it a hybrid at a later point. Porsche say that makes their car future-proof. Well, as is always the case, you'd have to see what it would cost to have it retrofitted at a stage that they introduced it. But it is really nice at least to see it being thought of at this stage. And at nearly 15 litres, I wouldn't mind a little bit more economy. As the sun sets here in Greece, that just about brings us to our end with our adventures with the Carrera 911S. So what do we think about it? Well, the main purpose of our task here today was to decide just what we thought about the Cabriolet. We already knew how much we liked the coupe, and we already knew just what a great job we thought Porsche had done with the new generation of the 911. So, full cards on the table. I am a big Cabriolet fan. Why? Well, I can't think of any reason for owning a car like this unless that reason is to have fun. And it's just more fun. The differentiation's simple for me. If what you want is a car that now and then you can take on the track, hands down, get the coupe, no discussion. It really is going to deliver the top sporting experience you can get from a 911. But if you're not going to see a track, and if most of your excursions in your car that really are going to bring joy to you are like this, even if where you live it's only perfect sunshine 5 days of the year, for those 5 days the huge grin that having a soft top puts on your face makes this absolutely essential. Yes, of course, there are compensations. It is more heavy, it is a little less wieldy, I guess you could say, and it is a little slower. But trust me, if you go with the Chrono Pack, you are definitely not going to notice that lack of speed. The handling is superb. The only downsides I can find on this car really are all connected with the way that the technology interfaces with the user. I really don't like the interface with the infotainment system. On the upside, there are such an unbelievable range of options and things that you can adjust that over time, and the more that you get to know the car, the more you will find the settings that you rely on, use every day, and can adjust to exactly the way that you like them. I guess I'm just a bit old-fashioned. I still prefer buttons every time when I can get them. But the new digital display for the driver is very effective and works very well indeed. Overall, this car absolutely is an evolution for the 911. It's better in every single way than its predecessor. It's every bit as much fun to drive, but you really feel that less compromise is being brought to bear simply because you want to feel a little bit of wind through your hair. So that pretty much does it for us. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them below. Please subscribe, and we hope we'll see you again soon.